If you know who the Cluemaster is, and that's already a generous if, you'd be forgiven for squinting at him and thinking, discount Riddler. He lives in the same city with a very similar obsession, the desperate need to prove he's the smartest man in the room. He even debuted in 1966 at the height of Batman's colourful gimmick villain era, practically waving at the audience and asking to be compared to the green-suited overachiever. But here is where it gets interesting. In 2004's The Batman, he almost was the Riddler. Early in production, the creative team designed a radically reimagined, quiz-obsessed villain. Grotesque, obsessive, figuratively swollen with ego and trivia, and literally obese. But DC reportedly balked at the idea. The redesign was too extreme for one of Batman's premier rogues. Not wanting to waste the effort and let a distinctive character design go, the concept was reassigned. The character became Cluemaster instead. And if that isn't the most Cluemaster thing imaginable, then I don't know what is. Even at a meta level, he's the substitute, the idea that didn't quite make the cut, a near miss. But the creative pivot does something fascinating. It tells us what Cluemaster has always really been about. Insecurity masquerading as intellect. Because beneath the surface similarities to the Riddler, Artie Brown has never truly been Gotham's master of riddles. He's been something more fragile. An average man obsessed with being seen as clever. To understand why the 2004 vision works, and why the pivot feels almost poetic, we need to rewind. Cluemaster first appeared in Detective Comics number 351, published in 1966, during the bright theatricality of the Silver Age. From the outset, he had little interest in theft. What he really wanted is to outsmart Batman. Artie Brown presents himself as a criminal mastermind who leaves clues at crime scenes, believing this intellectual breadcrumb trail elevates him above common thuggery. But even in his debut, there's an awkwardness to the performance. His puzzles lack the elegance of the Riddler, whose shadow he very clearly stands in. In most cases, Batman and Robin don't even get his obtuse clues. They stumble into the answers and end up getting the better of him. Now, he debuted at a time when America was gripped in Batmania, thanks to the Adam West starring TV show, and the writers on the comics went out of their way to create new villains each month in the hopes that they might somehow end up on the screen. Cluemaster did not make the cut, and subsequently he made very few significant appearances in the following decades. He drifts in and out of stories, most often appearing in crowd shots of supervillains or short-lived team-ups. Most notably, he becomes part of the Injustice League during the comedic Justice League International era, a group whose defining trait is spectacular incompetence. They fail repeatedly against the heroes, briefly attempt to rebrand as Justice League Antarctica, and collapse back into villainy almost immediately. And yet that mediocrity became fertile ground in the early 1990s. In Detective Comics number 647, writer Chuck Dixon revisited the character and put him in the spotlight. We learned that he had served time in Blackgate and undergone therapy to cure his compulsive need to leave clues. However, the need to leave clues wasn't why he committed crime, so once cured, Brown returns to crime, just without the theatrical flair. He joins a gang as a strategist, taking a percentage of their profits, and eventually murders the gang's leader in cold blood. This once bumbling pretender became more ruthless and therefore dangerous without the need to prove himself. But the true turning point in Cluemaster's legacy isn't any particular scheme, it's his daughter. During this storyline, it is revealed that Arthur had a teenage daughter, Stephanie Brown. He had been absent for most of her life, lost to prison sentences and failed schemes. When she discovered that he had resumed criminal activity, she took matters into her own hands. Stephanie created the identity of Spoiler, deliberately leaking clues about her father's operations so that Batman could stop him. It is actually quite poetic how Cluemaster's signature trait becomes the weapon used against him. In the confrontation that follows, Cluemaster takes Spoiler hostage during a heist, threatening her with acid in a desperate bid for leverage. He assumes Batman will lecture him about morality. Instead, Batman simply reveals Spoiler's identity. She is his daughter. For a man obsessed with control and intellectual dominance, being blindsided by his own child is devastating. He is defeated not by riddles, not by strategy, but by the truth, and a swift blow to the face. From that point forward, Cluemaster functions less as an A-list villain and more as a recurring catalyst in Stephanie's evolution. Each time he escapes or resurfaces, she returns to action. Because of this, Stephanie gradually grows into a full-fledged hero in her own right, eventually even taking the mantle of Robin for a time. Arthur Brown never became Gotham's master strategist. Instead, he was a flawed origin point of a hero who surpasses him in every conceivable way. While that is his most significant contribution to the Batman mythos of the comic books, his first on-screen adaptation in 2004's The Batman completely abandoned all of this. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the creative team didn't set out to adapt Cluemaster at all. Instead, they wanted to reinvent the Riddler. Their version was a child prodigy, the kind newspapers adore and talk shows parade. He basks in the glow of being the smartest kid in the room, and intelligence becomes his whole identity. And because it is constantly rewarded, and he is heaped with praise for it, he becomes certain in himself. He doesn't just believe he's clever, he believes he cannot be beaten, and that illusion was shattered on television. As reigning champion of the quiz show Think Thank Thunk, he dominated for 12 consecutive weeks before finally being defeated by another contestant, Yelena Klimenov. For a normal person, coming in second place after a lengthy reign on top would be enough, but rather than accept it, he explodes, accusing the show of being rigged, insisting he was cheated. His mother files a lawsuit on his behalf, reinforcing the narrative that the world is at fault. When the case is dismissed, he fades into obscurity, stewing in his humiliation. He isolates himself in his home, brooding over the defeat, sustained by a lifetime supply of snacks he won as a consolation prize, which act as a sugary reminder of that moment he refuses to process. He piles on the weight as his world shrinks to his mother's basement. The prodigy who once promised so much becomes emotionally arrested at the age he lost. Sure, he is intelligent, but it sours into arrogance and bitterness. He sits there in his basement dwelling, stuffing his face with snacks, rewatching his defeat over and over again, wallowing in his own despair, and this is what drives him to put on a costume and get his revenge. This was going to be their version of the Riddler until DC executives rejected the idea outright. It was just too far a departure for such a recognizable figure. For a full breakdown on how they did eventually adapt the Riddler, check out this earlier video I made, linked to in the info button, so add that to your watch later list if the subject interests you. But rather than abandoning the idea completely, the writers decided to reuse it. They'd already done the hard work there with a simple palette swap and switching his name from Eddie Nigma to Artie Brown. Their version of the Cluemaster was born. He makes his one and only appearance in the episode Q&A, where he kidnaps Yelena, game show host Ross Darren and producer Herbert Ziegler, forcing them into a grotesque recreation of the quiz show that broke him. The rules are simple and sadistic. They ask him questions, and if he answers them correctly, he earns a point. If he gets the answer wrong, then they will get a point. The first to 3 points will win. If they win, they will be released, but if he wins, they will be dunked in a vat of acid. This is not about money or prestige, it's about rewriting a single moment in his life. The worst day of his life, the moment his idyllic childhood ended, and he was set on the obsessive path of creating a new identity for himself. Does that sound like anyone else we know? Yes, this is just one villain that is a distorted reflection of Batman. Bruce Wayne's life was defined by childhood trauma, the murder of his parents. He responds to his emotional anguish by disciplining himself, fighting to make sure that other people don't go through the same thing that he did. Artie Brown's life is shaped by childhood embarrassment from a public defeat. He was warped by a bruised ego. Bruce internalizes loss and builds something outwards. Artie externalizes loss and rots inwards. Batman understands he cannot know everything, which is why he trains endlessly. Artie believes he already knows everything, and that belief leaves him stunted. There's also the presence of his mother, who is indulgent, protective, and reinforces his delusions. Coddling replaces discipline, and excuses replace growth. He is, in many ways, emotionally arrested at the moment he lost that game show, in the same way that Batman's mind still lingers on that fateful night in Crime Alley. But I do find it interesting how Artie's revenge is very private. It's not like he's broadcasting his mock game show. He does publicly humiliate his victims when he kidnaps them, like launching Ross Darren into the bins when he was opening a supermarket, or putting a whoopee cushion beneath Herbert Ziegler's seat at his performance. But his ultimate victory is reserved for his eyes only. Similarly, it's genuinely funny how this one moment defined Artie's life, but when he confronts his would-be nemesis, they barely remember who he is. He accuses them of being out to get him because he won too much. And the really funny thing is that no one outright denies that they screwed him over by giving Yelena easier questions. When the subject is brought up, Ziegler offers to just give Artie the prize money, but that won't do. He wants to prove his intellectual superiority. The thing is, there's a world of difference between intelligence and recall. Memorizing facts is a good use of mental storage, while intelligence is the application of information. One is knowing the answer in advance, the other is adapting when the answer doesn't exist, and in that regard Artie is as dumb as a sack of hammers. His conviction that he cannot lose ultimately causes his downfall. When Batman arrives, Artie gleefully challenges him to an all-or-nothing question, and Batman accepts, asking one question: who is the Batman? It's unanswerable by design, and Artie spirals. He demands another question, something that was written in his books that he can recall, but that wasn't the deal. He insists he's been cheated again and tries to kill his hostages and Batman. He may be big, but he's blubbery, and when he gets tripped up by Batman, he's knocked out by the force of his own weight hitting the ground. After this, the Cluemaster faded into obscurity. He reappeared briefly in Rumours, captured by the vigilante Rumour alongside the Riddler no less, and was accidentally frozen by Mr. Freeze, but he never had a second significant role. Even in the Batman Strikes tie-in comic, he remains peripheral. It's almost like the writers accepted DC's judgment and cast him off, but used him once just so that all the effort that went into their pitch didn't get wasted. Still, what we got was pretty decent. He was the prodigy who couldn't accept defeat, and his ultimate failing was his fragile ego. In a city full of theatrical madmen, that's oddly grounded. He was a boy who was told he was special for too long and couldn't endure the moment doubt entered his mind. He still had excellent recall abilities, but he couldn't handle being in second place. Batman's question wasn't just a clever trap, it was philosophical. There will always be something you don't know. You don't have to be the absolute best in order to have value, but Artie Brown couldn't see that. Cluemaster has always lived in the shadow of someone cleverer than him. In the comics, in production meetings, even within his own story. Whether he's the bargain bin answer to the Riddler or the prodigy who couldn't bear coming second, Arthur Brown is defined by a lack of humility. He falls because he cannot accept that he doesn't know everything. And that's what makes him such a mirror for Batman. One man turns childhood pain into purpose, the other turns embarrassment into obsession. In the end, Cluemaster shows us that intelligence without resilience collapses the moment it meets a question it cannot answer. That's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time. When I return on Friday, we'll be talking about the role of fan service in Static Shock and how his best friend Richie also became a hero. Yes, we're talking about gear. And next Monday, we're going to go back to Batman the Animated Series to discuss an early episode without any supervillains in it at all and a very clear social message. It's a story about regrets, loss, disappointment, and doing the right thing. Let's discuss It's Never Too Late. Hope to see you then.